You're listening to How We Got Here. I'm Christopher McClellan, joined by Christina Best.
Howdy.
So, Christina, if you like today's conversation, I think everybody should just go in and say subscribe, rate, like a 6 or something. Can you do 6 on these?
I mean, they should make it happen for us. I think we're worthy of 6 stars.
Well, for us, I would think, especially on this episode for sure. And leave a review wherever you get your favorite podcast.
See, your intro was so Christina. I thought you were going to tell me to leave a review, in which case I would say that's already been done. Are you allowed to rate and review your own?
Like a zillion times, hasn't it?
Exactly.
I am looking forward to today's conversation because we're going to party with Robert.
We are. It's going to be a party, if you will.
Very much so, because Robert Pardi is one of those rare individuals who embraces change and lives what he calls possibility in action, taking his desire for transformation and putting it into action daily. He received his MBA from Columbia University and was quickly recruited by the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, one of the largest sovereign wealth funds. Shortly after his wife, Desiree, was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. Unfortunately, she passed away 11 years later, and in 2014, throwing caution to the wind, I just love this, Robert left from his comfort zone by changing careers and moving to the same Italian village his great-grandfather immigrated from over 100 years ago. He is now a certified life coach, adjunct professor, international speaker, and author of Chasing Life, the remarkable true story of love, joy, and achievement against all odds. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you very much. Before we start, I just have to say, so you said we're going to have a party. I don't admit this to people normally. My nickname in university was Party Rob.
Party Rob.
So
we might
it
as well
checks out.
start there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And while you and I have had plenty of conversations before that, you say I didn't know that part of it. So that tells you how people kind of connect. But Robert, what we like to do with all of our guests, how did you get here?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know how much time we have, but it's a really interesting story, right? Because you highlighted a little bit about the journey with my wife, and that led to a complete transformation. But I'd back it all the way up to my childhood, because it was my childhood which really gave me the skills to, and I would say the life skills to master change appropriately or in a healthy manner, because I grew up in a dysfunctional relationship with an alcoholic dad who was abusive. And very early on, that taught me about uncertainty. It taught me how to read certain things. It taught me about what my capabilities were. And as a kid, of course, you don't really have capabilities, but you start to develop an idea of resilience and grit, even though you couldn't put the titles on them. And one day I just found the strength. I got a little taller, I was watching Rocky and I was drinking the, raw eggs, and I blame it on the raw eggs. No, but I was able to fight back. And it was in that moment I found a certain type of power. But what I'd highlight is that power was fueled by anger. And as I matured, anger is not sustainable. I realized that it wasn't something that could propel me in a healthy way. It absorbed a lot of my energy, let's say. But then I met an amazing woman, and she was 17, I was 19, and really just we fell in love. But really that falling where the rest of the world doesn't exist. And we got married a few years later. My wife wanted to pursue an MD, PhD. I had pursued finance because, as a kid, all I kept thinking was money was going to save me. So finance for me, and that let's say, golden ticket of being independent was a type of freedom, was why I pursued it. And we had an amazing life. I was thinking of changing careers when I was offered a job at the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority. My wife she did an MD PhD. She had finished 2 years of medical school. The way it works is 2 years of medical school, 3 years or 4 years of a PhD, and 2 years of medical school. So she was just finishing up her PhD. I went out there. It sounded great. We were going to meet in a different country every 6 weeks. It was just, sort of this wild romance type thing. And we figured we were young enough. When she finished her PhD, she decided she wanted to live in the Emirates with me. But to actually live in the Emirates, you have to go through a medical screening. They're basically testing for transmittable diseases like tuberculosis. But because she hadn't had a real physical in a while, we were like, why don't you just get a real physical? She was having pain under her arm, and lo and behold, she was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. The interesting thing was my wife lived a very interesting philosophy, which I've adopted, in terms of basically absolute no judgment. And we could have a whole discussion between judgment and discerning, because they're two completely different things. But she wouldn't even judge herself. So she never knew her MCAT scores. She never knew her university scores. She just wanted to know she was doing her best. And so when she was diagnosed, she said, Robert, I know enough to be dangerous to myself. Would you handle all of my medical situation? She didn't want to know the size of the tumor, the number of lymph nodes. She only wanted to know next steps. And she was very vocal in defining what quality of life meant to her. She wanted to be aggressive. So what aggressive treatment meant, what she was willing and not willing to do and accept. And she really laid out a great plan for me to execute. So I was the front person. I spoke to the doctors. They would give me all the information, which sounds like it would be really overwhelming. But this is where I really learned about purpose. Because what I realized is purpose is when you take your passions and you align them with your values. But you want to actually give away the results. The results have nothing to do with you. You don't want to pat on the back. You don't want to keep them for yourself. You give them away. And so it became purposeful. Now, that's not to say, I didn't have a big meltdown when it became stage 4, because she had that little period where she was technically in remission. But I doubt she ever was. Just back then, they really didn't have PET scans like they do today that are so detailed. And I had to sort of weave my way through that. But for the most part, it wasn't heavy like it would sound. And after she passed away, honestly, her example, the way I showed up for her, and a little voice in my head from my paternal grandmother, who was sort of my savior, which is funny, right? Because it was her son that was the alcoholic and beating me. But she would say to me, look how weak he is. He's a slave to all of this. Don't ever be like that. Live like a gypsy. She would just tell me all these different things. And I looked at my life and I said, but what am I doing? Like, I learned all this stuff and I'm not using it. I wasn't going to use that in finance. And I knew that what I walked would help other people walk through a similar journey. And I really am that type of person that, I don't like to be afraid. And I think that comes from my childhood as well. Like, if my dad did hit me, I'd stand back up and ask him to try harder, just because I wanted to make sure I was going to be able to handle things. And I looked at my life and I said, no, I really want to test myself here, that whole test your mettle type thing. And once I paid off, because an 11-year battle with breast cancer is not cheap. And it's not necessarily just the insurance aspect of it, but she was taking, 50 supplements a month back in the early 2000s. That was not cheap. Organic food was not cheap. I can't tell you how many different types of wheatgrass I would put in does anyone drink wheatgrass? anymore, by the way. I think that went away, right? I don't think so. But I had my wheatgrass juicer. I would order the wheatgrass from California, credit cards. But once I paid off the debt, and I could go into a whole story of how I wound up in Italy, because it sort of has to do with me being a fan of chick flicks, for lack of a better word. And so I wound up just saying, you know what, I'm going to do it. And I showed up in Italy. I didn't speak the language. I didn't have a house. I didn't have a job. I didn't know anyone. I wound up teaching English for $8 an hour because, I might have been in investment banking, but I spent all my money taking care of my wife, which I would do again in a second, because we were lucky enough to be able, if she was depressed, to say, hey, do you want to go away for the weekend, or, those types of things. And I didn't want to save money for a future when I knew the present was certain. And that's a whole nother discussion, right? Of how that journey taught me to be present, to understand how much unnecessary junk we carry around with us. I mean, our thoughts, how much stuff we worry about, our homes, how much stuff we think can fill something. I have this whole thing about, a hollow. A lot of us feel this hollow, and we accumulate. But it's sort of like Hermione's magic bag from Harry Potter. The more you stuff in that, the more space there seems to be, right? You're just expanding a void.
Right.
And that's how I wound up being here. So that's how I got here.
Thanks for sharing all of that.
Sure.
So much for us to continue to unpack in this conversation. I think what was stickiest for me as a follow-up is Desiree, your wife. She was a palliative care physician, correct?
Correct.
Was training in palliative care. So I think it would be great for you to elaborate on her training, her medical training, specifically in palliative care, and how that influenced, as you said, it, for many people, it might seem like a lot to take on. It might seem daunting to be asked to be the primary voice for a loved one going through an illness like cancer. But in her case, she had the training, and I would imagine by proxy, you probably picked up on some of the lessons she learned from that as well. Anyway, my roundabout question, I guess, is, what did talking about illness, living with cancer, treatment, and then eventually end of life, what did those conversations look like for you as a couple?
That's a great question, really, because the interesting thing was, my wife decided to go into palliative care because she had a terminal disease. And she thought her actually wearing the shoes of a patient could have the most impact in that field, because she understood. She did her fellowship at Memorial Sloan Kettering in pain management and palliative care, and she became the founding director of palliative care at New York Hospital while having metastatic breast cancer.
Wow.
I think when I look back on it, a lot of her training actually came from the doctors that took care of her. They were not palliative care doctors. They were oncologists, but we switched oncologists midstream because of wanting to do something a little more alternative, because that was her desire to be aggressive. But, her first doctor made sure that the quality of life she defined, I want to work, I want to travel to the Middle East and see my husband, I want to go here, I want to go there. That was palliative care, even though palliative care really wasn't mainstream like it is today. But he followed a palliative care approach. Her second oncologist as well. And so just the team around us, I think, was a big education, one for the both of us, because there's a very strange understanding of palliative care, because palliative care is not hospice. Hospice is part of palliative care. Palliative care is actually available to anyone, regardless of age, regardless of stage of disease, to maintain a quality of life, reduce suffering. And so we had a lot of discussions around quality of life. That's the discussion she and I had. We also had a discussion that we should never extend death. And so there would come a moment, and she explained this to me very well. She had said at the very beginning, Robert, I'm going to be really aggressive. I want to be really aggressive. The treatments will probably kill me if I don't get the cancer under control. And we were willing to go that route. Mm-hmm. When it came time that it really was, we would have been extending death when we realized that her body would no longer be handling it. Even though we never spoke the words death, when she was in the hospital, she just said to me, Robert, I'm tired. And I said, okay, baby, rest. And I knew she was saying, Robert, transition my care. And, there were other things I could have done. I knew I could have. I had this, she became obstructed because of the cancer in her intestines by that point. But there was a shot I could have given her that we had. And I actually brought it to the hospital with me. And I thought, well, if I give her this, I could probably make her go to the bathroom. But she could also perforate, or we could have given her surgery and she could have had a bag. But that wasn't quality of life to her at that point. So our discussions around all of that was about what does it mean to actually live? Because the way life for me is going to be different than for you or than for Chris or anyone else. Once we're clear of our values and once we're clear of our objectives and our passions, you have to be very conscious. There's a beautiful quote, and I'm deviating a little bit, but I think this is so important to understand. It's by Richard Bach, and he says, we're each born with a block of marble and the tools to sculpt it into a sculpture. We can leave it untouched. That's inaction, or that's not being conscious in your life. We can pound it into gravel. That's anger, or the lack mentality, comparing ourselves to other people. Or we can shape it into glory. And that's knowing how we want to live. And so it's very interesting because there's so many aspects of palliative care, but the tenet is quality of life. So that's what our discussion's really focused on.
Yeah, I always love an opportunity to talk about palliative care so people understand what a wonderful resource it is.
Yeah, it's misunderstood, like I said, because of hospice, but it's such an amazing resource. It really is, because what's happened in traditional medicine, and there's nobody to blame, because we do also live in a culture of I'm broken, fix me. Mm-hmm. So, you go to a doctor, I'm broken, I have diabetes, give me a pill so I can continue to eat my donuts, as an example, right? Yes. And that works. But then that is not focusing on the patient, it's focusing on the disease. Mm-hmm. And palliative care takes a much broader look, trying to understand the person, and not just the person, the unit. Palliative care is there for the family member, because most diseases are and I say family, but what I mean is unit, because maybe, and it might not be brother and sister, maybe it's two people living together and they're each other's companions, and they're going through different aspects of the disease, but they're both going through that disease.
So many profound things that you've said here, Rob, that I took some copious notes.
I was going to say, I saw you feverishly taking them over there.
Well, it's
I got it all up here.
This is really good. Yeah, well, that's what 30 years younger does for
Trust me, I totally understand that. So you and I are in the same camp, Chris.
Yeah, for sure. But so profound about determining what is quality of life. And what you said that I kind of highlighted here, never extend death. because we're so used to talking about, and we say, well, we only live once. Well, that's really not true. We live a number of lives. We change careers. We live a variety of life during our time, but we only die once.
So true.
And why extend something that's inevitable when it's pain and suffering? Having that conversation, having the ability to have those conversations, which you guys had, is just, and to share this is so meaningful and helpful.
I'm so glad you brought that up. And honestly, it's that whole idea of pain and suffering, right? Even for those of us that have then lost somebody as well, we have to move through that pain and suffering. But pain and suffering doesn't have to define, like Desiree's disease, it didn't define our lives. It was something that we had to manage. We lived, let's say, around it. You know, I've come up with all these different phrases and quotes, but at the end of the day, it really is joy that measures a quality of life, not time. Not exactly. Time at all. And when it became unbearable for her, or when she knew, and this is really interesting because a couple of weeks before she wound up being hospitalized for the last time, she had been suffering a lot of pain, and she loved to go to the beach, but we just couldn't go away anymore. It was a little difficult. And I said, hey, let's take a taxi to Coney Island and, go grab a Nathan's hot dog. And we did. And she ate the hot dog. She walked to the shore. She put her feet in the sand. She smiled radiantly, turned around and said, Robert, I need to go home. And I think that was her moment of saying that quality of life I wanted, those joyful moments, they're going to take a back seat to pain and suffering. Because she was very clear when she asked me, she told me, I'm tired. She was very clear that, I did what I needed to do.
And through the experience that you had, what recommendations would you make for anyone, really? I mean, I know we tout ourselves as a caregiving specific podcast, but really we're all going to have to help, as we talk about a lot, help people, loved ones make their life transitions. And so how can we make sure that we are making ourselves available, while also setting healthy boundaries, around an end of life experience or through an illness? Would love to hear what your recommendations are based on your experience.
I love that question. I love it. And what you just mentioned that, of course it's basically a caregiving podcast, but the question you're asking really has a lot to do with life. It's a life skill, right? Because what I learned very early on is, and it's hard for us actually to define what the ego is. So when I say, I know I had to put my ego aside, was the fact that I couldn't let my needs paint my basically bearing witness to her journey. Because when we love somebody, or caregiving in general, we want to help, we want to fix. I suffered Superman syndrome like you have no idea. That's sort of why. That's why when the cancer occurred, it just threw me for a loop. But I wanted a fix, and what I realized is I had to support her. I had to listen, and this is so critical, and it's not just about caregiving. It really is about communication. And unfortunately, I'm talking for myself, but in general, we don't like to have difficult conversations, and we don't like to show our vulnerability. But it was in sitting in those conversations, knowing that the only thing I could do was really listen. Yes, you can change the bandages, and I learned how to flush a port by the end of the time, and plug in what was called TPN, which was the liquid nutrition, and a whole bunch of other things. But what I realized is my wife needed me to see her as a person, as a woman, as my wife. I can't tell you how many fights we had about she didn't want to be married to a parent. I had to learn that lesson. It didn't just happen overnight. So it is that ability to communicate. I'll be very, very frank here. It's difficult on both parties. I have to say, I don't know other cancers, but I can definitely tell you with breast cancer and the treatments, lots of sexual side effects. Very much interrupts intimacy. A woman has already, in my wife's case, lost her breasts, and now she doesn't feel like a woman, and her body isn't allowing her to enjoy things as a woman. Mm-hmm. And then you're the man. And so, again, you could avoid the issue, which creates distance between both people, and then that person you're caring for is going to feel alone. That was the thing that really tugged at my heart, was every so often I would say, wow, how alone she must feel to not be able to talk about these things with me. Maybe she's talking about it with her doctor, and that meant that I had to sit there, and I couldn't bring up, unless it was appropriate, well, I can't take it either. I mean, that's not something she would want to hear, right? She wanted to know that she existed. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a lot about what caregiving needs to become, or that's a lesson that's very fundamental, is the more we try to fix the person, the more they become an object. And nobody wants to be an object in their life.
Wow, that is so true. And balancing that roadmap between a pre-established relationship and then adding caregiving to the mix is a daunting task.
It's so daunting. You know it. So, with Des, those arguments of she didn't want to be married to a parent, right, was the basis to sort of find that balance. I couldn't take it personally, because I was trying to do what I thought was right, but that was my perspective, right? And so it's understanding her perspective. I remember when she said she wanted to go to India, I almost lost my mind. I was like, you're neutropenic half the time, and you want to go to India. We can't even drink the water. How are you going to take a shower? What if water gets in your mouth? That was her life. And so I have to ask myself, and when I did ask myself, I was bringing the fear of losing her, because fear is just future focused anyway, right, into that moment. And that's why I was trying to fix, because I was trying to avoid an inevitability. And when I accepted that inevitability, not that I wanted her to pass away, but it's, that idea of surrender and impermanence, all of a sudden this became a journey we were both on. I tend to be an extremely curious person. I say all the time to a lot of people, and I read this in an amazing book as well, by a woman named Jennifer O'Brien. But I'm not suicidal, but I also wouldn't say no to my time. And one, because I know it has to happen. And two, I'm a little curious, like, what's next? Am I actually going to see Des on the other side? But once we did that, and part of the balance also came, Chris and Christina, came from being a little more playful about the whole idea. And that's not meaning to make light of a horrible situation. But there were times that she would wake up in the middle of the night, turn over, and projectile vomit on me in the bed. And then I had to take the dog away, because the little dog was all excited to have a little treat. And I'm like, okay, you got to go. like yeah, we had a little Yorkie. So the first one or two times, she was so embarrassed, and then we just sort of started to make fun of it. Now, if you were hanging out with even boyfriend, girlfriend, a partner, whatever, and something like that happened because you were out drinking and partying all night, you probably would laugh about it. It wouldn't be a horrible event. But it's a horrible event because it's tied to a journey no one wants to realize is happening. And so we just sort of turned it into something else. The balance is, my journey is completely different than anyone else's. What I learned hopefully resonates with some people. The grief I went through is completely different than anybody else because we're all unique, but there are pieces that we could try to use. And I think that's why it's like these types of podcasts, what the two of you were doing is amazing, because also the people that are listening realize they're not alone, right?
Mm-hmm. That's the goal.
That's the goal for sure. Because that sense of being alone, even though, we see statistics and there's supposedly, millions of people in this role, but when you're in it yourself, you do feel alone. And that's why we do these. And then we have awesome people like yourself who share their experience because we recognize that we're not alone and we're not isolated.
Thank you for that. And that alone thing, what I realized very early on, especially from the caregiver point of view, you are thrown into a job you're not prepared for. The job function changes every day. And you're speaking a language that those around you don't understand. I mean, look at the word neutropenic. That's like part of my everyday language.
Yeah, you just threw that out there and I'm like, what?
Yeah. So, but that isolates us because all of a sudden we're communicating differently and we have fears and we have worries and people can't understand them, those around us, and they want to fix us. And I'm not saying it's pro or con support groups, but it's so important to be able to talk with someone the way you're learning to speak. Because if you're just holding it all in because no one understands you, you'll feel more alone. And then you'll start to feel that, oh, there's something wrong with me because, I can't connect with my old friends. We gained great new people in our life and we lost some people in our life because of that dynamic. Right. And that's why, the alone thing can be completely overwhelming.
Is there any advice you have on welcoming? I mean, obviously, as you said, you may lose some friends and folks in your lives. It's natural throughout our lifetimes, particularly during or through illness and the end of life. But is there anything that we can do to story sharing being one of them, I think, but what else can we be doing to welcome people into that journey with us and make it more accessible to them? And you can't force curiosity on people, but what can we do to welcome friends and other family into that journey with us, to be there for us?
So important. We were very vocal about what we needed from other people. There is a tendency not, I think, to burden people when you're going through something like this. But we were very vocal about this is what's happening. This is what we need. This is what we don't need. And we would say to people, do you want to understand what it's like? We were sort of more of the initiator, I think, than waiting for someone to respond. That just might be our personalities as well. That worked for the most part. But there were people that would give my wife the breast cancer books and, donate money to breast cancer and give her the card for Christmas. And that's very, very nice. But she didn't want that to be the focal point of her life or our life. So I think illness is a call to action to, again, if you want to use that, shape it into glory or craft your life. It is to step up and say, this is who I am. This is what I'm going through. This is what I need. Are you with me? Do you want to understand more about it? And it's a grieving process when you lose friends, right? Or even family. We lost some family as well that wouldn't speak to us. But and why it's a grieving process, because you realize that the disease is causing a type of loss.
Right.
And we had to also look at it and say, okay, well, what do we want in our life? And that allowed us to look at the gain. There's always there's this phrase that I read once that says, never look at what's the potential loss, but look at the gain that is possible. And it held very well for us. So I think if someone is going through a situation like this and they see the dynamic around the people changing, step out. You're already going through so much. You already have so much strength. Why let that distract you or utilize any of your energy? So just go out there and say, this is what it is. Because at the end of the day, it's a filtering process, right? Like, if those people aren't the right people for you, then they're not the right people for you. There's a natural selection, let it happen. Mm-hmm. And that brings you back again to that, not focusing on the loss, because it's just allowing you to have more space to maybe put something else in.
Yeah. And I found too, in that experience, while my dad was going through his illness and through his end of life, I think too, it just tells you, or what a situation like that demands of you, is for you to be the bigger person and remember, even at the age of 20, 21 that I was, that it's not about you when people do start to pull away or make weird decisions. Like, people make really weird decisions when you are going through grief. Like, people make it about them. It's so weird. You're like, hello. Hi, I'm the one that actually lost someone. But anyway.
That's so true, because, well, again, we don't know how to have these conversations anymore either. We talked about, Chris mentioned earlier, that I live where my great-grandfather came from. I actually knew him as a child. I think he passed away when I was 6 or 7. And I remember also the big Italian-American family where someone passed away and the men wore the black band, and we talked about it. We don't talk about these things enough, and then people get very uncomfortable. And they don't know what the right thing is to do. And what happens when you're uncomfortable, you're starting to think about your own, where you're sitting in the equation. Mm-hmm. And you forget that it's the other person, like you said, Christina. They're like, hey, I'm the one that just lost somebody right now. Yeah. Like, can we change the dynamic of this conversation? So.
And I think with that, Robin, I know you're going to get in touch with this, is that when we have this experience, and I call this a very privileged experience, to be with somebody when they make their life transition, and to be able to take that experience and share it with others who are going through it for the first time, reminds us why this is such a profound experience to be a part of, and how, as you're able to share that with others, so that they can, as they go through this for the first time with a spouse or a family member or a good friend, that they're not alone.
So true. And a lot of people, when they hear that, what you just said, because it resonates with me so much, it is a profound journey. It is beautiful, is hard for a lot of people to accept when something like that happens. But, when I talked about earlier, the unnecessary and all the other things, I mean, there was pure connection with my wife, for sure, at the end of her life. And there wasn't a lot of the static that we normally carry around. there's also this idea of I wasn't angry. You know, my dad was diagnosed with lung cancer a year after Desiree was diagnosed with breast cancer, and he passed away within a year. And my mom says, "Oh, your dad was, taken." Here's the key word: he was taken too young. And first, I'm like, well, we could play the numbers game. He was 59, my wife was 40, so I think if we want to play, who was younger, right? But it's that idea of taken. There's a lot of anger because of when you lose somebody, you've lost part of your identity. You've lost what you thought your life was going to be. You've lost expectations. And it's very hard to then hear something like, it's an amazing opportunity for growth, or it's a beautiful experience, or, it's wonderful to witness, because there are those aspects. But if you strip it down to the fact that it's a journey we're all on, unfortunately, there's one stop at the end of this train, and we're all on the same train. We just might get off at those different stops.
Mm-hmm.
But it's nothing more. And maybe because my wife and I, the way we handled it, or because I was so consciously involved that I had to learn to put pieces away, but we did really live in an amazing life. And it was just accelerated. It wasn't that it was too short, because I'm so full from that experience. And I think this is a conversation that I think is very, very important. You look at the ancient philosophers and so much that was written, there wasn't really a fear of death. There was an understanding of impermanence. It was, yes, you grieved the loss of the person and that connection, but it was part of normal everyday society to talk about it. And now, we don't even want to show that we're aging. So, we forget about talking about death. So,
yeah. Speaking of which, are you aging, Robert? You have a very nice skin.
I definitely am aging. So, but it's good. It's all good, because,
What comes to mind is how often, for whatever reason, people, and I've done this myself, how often we postpone joy in our lives.
Wow. Yes.
And thinking about things that may happen or could happen, and you hit it on earlier, judgment versus discernment. Oh my, we used to hear that word all the time in the seminary, discernment. You're discerning. Well, it's like, yeah, it's a judgment. So, but we tend to postpone joy.
That's really my pet peeve. Let's say, if what I learned throughout this whole thing was how much joy exists. I mean, it's all around. We will all stop. 99.9%, I think, of people will all stop and look at a rainbow for a moment. Or like bubbles. Somebody's playing with bubbles, and the bubbles, float by.
Yeah.
And you're pulled into that experience. That sensation is joy. But like you said, Chris, you think about all these other things. I think it was Brene Brown that talks about foreboding joy, where, you're right on the cusp of being joyful, but you're afraid to feel it because you might lose it.
Right.
And if you want to really get to the impermanence thing, right, we're going to lose it all at one point in time. So, the idea of that's what that's like what the title Chasing Life means of the book. And it's what Desiree and I lived, was to focus on the present. And the present is a very hard thing for people to understand, because, and there's, but the present moment, once you realize it's there, it's already gone type thing. And what I'm talking about more is I'm talking about being conscious about where you are, what you're feeling, what you're doing. And when you think of joy, that exists really in the ordinary moments. We've become the Instagram society where we're all looking at what other people have and we feel lack. But, joy can be, like I said, it could be looking at that rainbow. It could be whatever you're eating, the conversation you're having. If you allow yourself to be open to being filled by it, right? To be filled by that experience and not worry about if it's the right experience, the fear of missing out, which is a crazy thing in and of itself, because the moment you're doing that, you're missing out on what you're doing anyway. So you're completely missing out. So, joy for me it exists even in adversity. Viktor Frankl would talk about it in A Man's Search for Meaning. There's a lot of people that have written books and books about it. And if you want, for me, it really was the journey towards end of life, which opened my eyes to the fact that there was so much joy. Playing with the dog. Wow, what a beautiful thing. Or hearing my wife giggle, and I bet you could both say the same thing. Those are the things that you think about, the people that are no longer in your life that you miss, those ordinary little moments. Desiree and I had the opportunity to travel extensively. I can't remember the inside of one 5-star hotel, really, but I can remember her eating that hot dog at Coney Island. So, joy is very, very important. And it's always there. Joy, let me put it this way. You can chase and pursue happiness, because happiness is more the outcome of something. Joy, all you have to do is lean into it.
It's beautiful. And I think hearing you speak about it, having not actually had the opportunity to speak in person like this with you before, you really make that joy, the happiness aspect of living feel accessible. I don't know if that's how you're experiencing this as well, Chris, but I think sometimes when you hear, like, you're a life coach and you know of the work that life coaches do, I think maybe I personally had not any stigma against it, but it's really powerful to actually hear you speak about these topics in person. Here you're just getting my real life reaction to our conversation.
Well, thank you very much. I had this stigma as well, by the way.
That's good to know.
Because what I had when I first learned about life, like, I became my wife's life coach. That's how this all really happened. Mm-hmm. To a certain extent, I had to be her life coach without actually having to go through life coach certification. Which in and of itself is another thing we can talk about, because we're so individual that I don't think there is a method to life coaching per se, because you have to bring your own personality into it. But a life coach, again, is not there to fix, because there is no fixing required. None of us are broken. None of us. Mm-hmm. A life coach is not there to do. A life coach really is not there to motivate. That's another word.
That's what I was going to say when I think of it.
You can only motivate yourself. But a life coach is there to help you understand your uniqueness, empower you to actually live that uniqueness. And that's how I see it personally. But like you said, accessibility, of course, joy is accessible. Resilience is accessible. That word, it has such a big meaning in the world, and people think it's only for a certain group of people. Every one of us has had our back against the wall and said, I can't take one more thing, and we do. That's resilience. We just have to learn how to access it on demand.
I love that. I love that. Access it on demand.
It's the force.
is. I wrote that down in big letters, by
Cool.
the way.
Big
So-
letters.
And not because I need a new prescription in my glasses, but that's how it is.
Well, I'm trying not to lean into the camera to actually see the both of you because I did go skydiving a few days ago, and I guess the goggles were not tight enough around my glasses, so they actually blew away. But it was still an amazing experience nonetheless.
That's a good excuse.
That's something. Yeah, that's something I'd like to do.
You know what?
That must have been exhilarating.
So exhilarating. Again, it's that curiosity thing, not liking to be afraid of things, but you don't actually free fall. I was really surprised. I mean, it's because the plane's going so fast, there's wind, you sort of fall out of the plane and you feel like you're there. The parachute, on the other hand, wow, that like pulls you up like a rocket. I don't know how fast I was going or how high I went, but yeah, I wasn't expecting that.
That's making my stomach drop thinking about. I'm also fairly hungry, so I'll be getting lunch after this, and my stomach's just feeling a little sensitive right now.
You're having a late lunch today,
I always
Christine.
do.
Oh,
I
goodness.
always do. I'm very European. I eat dinner at like 9 or 10.
Well, we've got a transplanted European as our guest and a wannabe into 2022. So, because Robert's living his dream, and he's kind of helping me achieve what I like to do next year in Spain. So,
Chris, I have to tell you, Spain, you're looking at eating at like 10:30 at night. So just prepare yourself for that one.
perfect.
Works for me. Can I come with you, Chris?
Well, Christina,
I mean, in
of
order to do this
course. We could
podcast, we really need to be in a similar time zone.
We have to be on location. We have to be on location
Yeah.
together. We'll just have to get the caregiving.com/whole care network corporate
Yes.
jet filled up
yeah.
and we'll hop on over to Italy and pick up and party with Rob, not party, So.
No, you're definitely, once you're in Europe, you have to come visit where I live in Italy, because it's really, let's say, I believe it's authentic because it's not a well-known tourist destination, the region that I live in, and really good food. My town, they make their own cheese, their own olive oil, their own salami, so they call it 0 kilometer, which means like it's all local, and it's good.
That sounds amazing. That's on my bucket list, getting to Europe. COVID obviously put a big dent in a lot of people's travel plans.
Oh yeah.
I started looking for tickets today for Spain for December.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
Good for you.
But, because I don't want to postpone joy.
There you go. Yeah, don't. Just to get back like on that topic, it is valid to prepare for the future and put money in a retirement plan and all of these other things. But where did we come up with the idea of the whole work week is horrible and thank God it's Friday? Like, really, we just get one day out of the week to be happy? Or postpone things until retirement, and all this whole idea of postponing. Do either of you know what the blue zones are in the world? Have you ever heard that term, the blue zones?
Mm-mm.
So the blue zones are where there's a large percentage of people that live above 100 years old. And I think the biggest blue zone in the world is Okinawa, Japan.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, Amsterdam?
Okinawa, Japan.
Okinawa. Okay. Got
And
it.
they live something called ikigai, which is basically living your purpose or living your passion. They say it's the reason you get up in the morning, but they do not have a word for retirement, because you should never retire from life. And we say retire from work, but if you're involved in something that really does give you joy and it is a passion and you feel purposeful, and let's just throw something around purpose, by the way, because that word is become unattainable for most people, and we all think we have to go around being Greta and saving the environment. Purpose could be, right? Purpose could be cooking a meal for somebody you love.
Oh, yeah.
That is purpose 100%. And so purpose, again, that's another one of those things that is attainable. It's accessible to all of us. But if you're living in that realm, then you don't retire, you don't postpone.
Exactly. It's kind of like deprogramming yourself from, you got to get up and go to that 9 to 5 job, and you got to work hard, and you got to put those extra 15 hours in that week so you could be accepted and be, because if you're not a hard worker.
Yeah, I think new
when you take care of somebody.
Go ahead.
When you take care of somebody that you love, and they make their life transition, and you're holding them, then you find out that some of those things that were programmed into your head about being successful, they don't really mean a hill of beans.
No. And you also realize when you're caring for someone, and Christina, you could probably talk about this as well, that motivation, for lack of a better word, that internal strength, because it's coming from, purpose and wanting to help that person and everything else. Wow, you have a ton more energy than you ever thought possible. And, again, we have a lot of these generational programmings that tell us that, we have to work really hard and we have to suffer for something in the future. And Chris, don't postpone your joy. Go to Spain, eat paella.
And I'm going to work on my framing. When you said making a meal for someone, that resonated, because I'm very intentional most weeks about making 2 or 3 dinners a night for myself and my boyfriend. And that it's as simple as reframing it, right? Like, all I have to say is that is purpose. And it is. I love making the meals.
It is. There's joy in that.
Even if it's just baked potatoes. Like, I love cooking for us.
I'm so with you on that one. And it all is. It really all is. Go back to that idea. I said that, purpose is when your passion comes in alignment with your values and you want to give away the results. That's part of what cooking is, right? When you put yourself into it to actually cook for, like you're saying, for your boyfriend, even if it's baked potatoes, it's something you're sharing. And I think it's so important, because all of these words have become things that only like superstars do, or, you have to be really big, or, no, we're all purposeful. We all have passion. We're all joyful. It's all accessible. It really is.
Yeah. Well, I would argue that some of that is because they're being framed through the lens of capitalism. But yeah, they all become commodified. All of these things.
Everything has become commodified. That's so much of a problem. And I think that's what's different in Europe. If I have to say, the way I live there as well is,
yes.
It's changing, of course, because that's just the way the world works. But there's still this idea of, you won't walk into a store. Forget the supermarkets in Italy, because they're the size of a 7-Eleven. So that's another aspect of it. But you won't see like 100 pairs of jeans to choose from, where the choice just becomes overwhelming, and you don't know if you're making the right choice because you haven't seen all the choices, and it just gets simplified. And that could bring us to, and I think this is part of what I learned, Desiree, our journey together. It's not minimalism. It's actually essentialism. Like, what was essential to our life? What was essential to a good life? It's not, you don't need that much. I remember when we were super, super poor, when we first got married. McDonald's would have a sale for hamburgers for like 25 cents. I'd go and buy 100 of them, and I'd freeze them. And you know what? I could have looked at that as suffering, but it was an experience we shared together. It allowed us to have money to maybe do something else. Maybe a lot of times we would buy a bottle of wine and go sit by the East River in New York City and drink out of the bottle, but not very upscale. But and those were amazing moments.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, what's essential? If you ask yourself that
What
question,
is essential?
What is essential to living a quality of life? Living a quality life, but living a high quality of life. What is essential? And that brings you back to really your values and that end of life journey. Well, you know what? All of a sudden, you really do focus on the essential.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and what an essential conversation this has been.
Can I tell you my first reaction to what you just shared there, Robert, was when I think of what's essential, especially in end of life, I'm just seeing macaroni and cheese. I have to put that out there. Oh.
Now, are you talking the macaroni and cheese, the nice yellow kind?
Yeah.
The little
one
elbow?
from the box with the squeezy cheese.
Oh, that is so good.
It's never not good. It's always delicious.
With a Nathan's hot dog mix.
There you go.
No, you lost me. Sorry. I don't eat hot dogs.
No,
I mean, I suppose if it was like a tofu dog or a veggie dog.
Oh, no, tofu. Let's not talk about tofu. No tofu.
Oh, no.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Tofu should not look like a hot dog, a hamburger, or did you ever watch Everybody Loves Raymond by... Does anyone know that show? Okay. Yeah. So my mother is Marie, and we had the plastic over the furniture, definitely grew up that way. But there's that episode where his Marie makes a tofu turkey, and it was that's all wrong. Tofu should just not take on the shape of other foods.
I agree. I'm not strictly vegetarian, but I don't need tofu. I don't need any other vegetable substitutes to be other things. Like the Impossible Burger, I don't need... I just want a veggie burger. I don't need my vegetables to taste like meat and be in the shape of meat and look like meat.
Yeah, I've never understood that one either, the Impossible Burger. But, there's definitely... There seems to be a demand for it. But
yeah, well, if it gets more people to eat plant byproducts, that's a good thing.
But macaroni and cheese... Yeah. Those are some of the things I do miss in Italy. Like it's even hard to get peanut butter in Italy. So,
well, I would imagine that's going to be packed in your suitcase.
No, actually, I leave that stuff where it's supposed to be. Let's say, when I get back to Italy, I'll be eating Nutella.
I mean, if you had to choose one or the other.
If I had to choose, you definitely do Nutella. That's for sure. Yeah. What a delightful conversation with you today, Robert.
Thank you both. I mean,
you see, Christina, I told you we were going to party with Rob.
Yeah, this really did feel like a party.
Cool. I'm glad.
Yeah, a serious conversation with a bit of humor.
A little peppering of
joy and a bit of
sprinkles.
Real life experience. I'm sorry, I missed that.
Little sprinkles of joy.
Little sprinkles of joy, because we're not postponing joy anymore.
Go out and get a soft serve ice cream cone with colored sprinkles. You're going to just feel so good.
Kind of like the rainbow.
Yeah, we've got a...
So, Robert, Christina, that's the first time we interrupted each other on this
at least
podcast.
In a while. We're usually pretty good about it. I'm just adding a non sequitur about how we have a Jenny's up the street. I don't know if either of you are familiar with the Jenny's ice cream brand, but it started here in Columbus, and they have locations all over the U.S. now. It's great ice cream. So I'm feeling very inspired to go get that now.
That would be a great lunch. You haven't had lunch.
Exactly. I'm like, do I make salad or do I go up the street to Jenny's? They always have seasonal flavors.
You're going to Jennings. Just go ahead and admit it. You're going to Jennings. That's your lunch today.
Well, Christina, I know Chris does, but do you also know Trish Laub by any chance? So anyway, I got to visit her, and after we visited, she sent me a message, and she's been eating Italian gelato for lunch.
Inspiration.
I bring that out in some people. I don't know why. So
yeah, like if you were a food, I guess I'm just like, I'm seeing ice cream. I don't know why.
That was one of my first jobs, actually, because I
Maybe
did
that's
start
why.
working when I was 13, just because of that whole idea to get away from my father, right? And I did work at Carvel, which I don't even know if they still have them anymore, but for like 2 years.
Well, that I must be seeing your inner former self.
Yes, my inner child.
Your inner scoop.
Inner
That's your
scoop.
inner scoop.
Inner scoop.
Oh my.
Oh, Robert, is there anything else you'd like to share with us today? It's just a wonderful conversation, and we certainly want to know, want all of our listeners to know how they can be in touch with you. And
Sure. One thing I would say, because I like saying the quote. So, and it comes from this idea, the way Desiree and I lived, is that it is only when you value the ordinary moments that you live an extraordinary life. And so I want people just, to contemplate that, because I think it's so important to not ignore those ordinary moments, because when they're gone, they're the ones that you really miss. As for contacting me, they could go to my website, which is robertpardi.com. If they're interested in learning about Chasing Life, they could go to chasinglifethebook.com.
Awesome.
what a wonderful afternoon.
Great, for me as well.
It has been. Just
And
like
I know
we're-
I'm really relaxed when I talk on these, talk on a podcast, because if you see, I'm swinging back and forth in my chair. I know I do that when I'm really relaxed, and I just feel like I'm talking with friends. So this has been fantastic.
And that's one of the best compliments I think we could receive,
I agree.
Christina.
We aim to be a comfortable, safe space.
100%. You achieve it both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your joy with us today.
My pleasure.